This video was voted into existence by our supporters on Patreon. More on that and how you can have input on the content we make later in the video. If there's one question I feel I ask myself more often than others, it would probably boil down to what if? There have been countless nights that I've spent looking over decisions I've made in the past and trying to assess where my life would be had I made a slightly different decision at big turning points, and even more where I weigh out potential hypothetical paths going forward. And truthfully, I don't think that this experience is exclusive to me, since none of us have the power to turn back the hands of time and play out our own personal what-if scenarios. More often than not, dwelling on them can potentially be anxiety-inducing. Today, however, our big what if is rooted in the world of fiction, and as a result, I assure you, will be less likely to keep you awake at night. You may recall that back in July, I started covering lost episodes of Batman the Animated Series, and towards the end of the second installment, suggested a third was on its way soon. Since then, we've decided that to be as thorough as possible with the information we have on the remaining episodes, our coverage would need to take a different form that will take longer to produce. In the meantime, the what if question has still been gnawing at the back of my mind, so rather than discuss an alternate timeline with more Batman episodes, I figured between the Red Hood's appearance in Batman The Adventures Continue and the Phantasm's entrance into the main DC Universe continuity, now would be the perfect time to discuss the DC Animated Universe's first Red Hood, their relation to the Phantasm, and everything else that would have occurred had one of my favorite comic book runs made it past its 17 published issues and finished the 40-issue arc its creative team had hoped for.
Showtime, everybody!
Engagement.
They can talk all they like.
That means everything.
Don't forget that. You heard it, folks!
For the uninitiated, the DC Animated Universe is a term that gets thrown around a lot these days to describe almost any animated content featuring DC Comics characters. I've seen it used to describe anything from Young Justice to the DC animated movie line to 2019's Harley Quinn animated series. But when the term was first coined, it had a very specific meaning in reference to the world of interlocked shows that spun out of 1992's Batman the Animated Series. Prior to this, the majority of DC cartoons that shared continuity were identifiable as part of the Super Friends franchise, and thus were easy enough to categorize as their own shared universe. But when the 90s Batman team moved on to Superman the Animated Series, then retroactively tied the shows together via crossovers with the new Batman adventures, it became clear that there was a new animated universe that didn't have a set naming convention, and thus the term DCAU became a moniker encompassing the three shows I've already mentioned and their successors, Batman Beyond, Static Shock, Justice League Unlimited, and of course, the Zeta Project. With the exception of Zeta, these shows were all based on comic book characters, and from a marketing standpoint, it made sense to give most of them their own tie-in comics. While most of the series in the Adventures line tied into specific shows that were currently airing, there were a few exceptions to the rule. The first of these exceptions, the Batman and Robin Adventures, kept us in Gotham using the Batman animated character designs for nearly 2 years after the show had concluded. This trend was followed by other notable titles such as Adventures in the DC Universe, Batman Adventures The Lost Years, Batman Harley and Ivy, Gotham Girls, and of course, Batman Adventures Volume 2, which acted as a sequel to almost all the prior Batman Adventures titles, set during the time period where the titular character, Batman, would have been working alongside the animated Justice League. You see, when the League first appeared in the far-off future of Batman Beyond, it was established that the original Batman was only ever a part-time member of the team, and despite showing up in a large amount of Justice League and Justice League Unlimited episodes years later, this dynamic remained intact.
What about you, Batman?
I'm not really a people person, but when you need help, and you will, call me.
You have to come with us, Bruce.
I don't have to do anything. I'm a part-timer, remember?
Due to how incredibly high stakes many League missions were, this would raise questions for fans about Batman's whereabouts.
Wonder Woman is on another case. Superman's dealing with an earthquake, and Batman would only say that he's busy.
Typical.
On with what, Batman? What are you doing that's more important than another alien invasion? While this question would never be resolved on screen, nearly 2 years after the League's animated debut, DCAU tie-in comic alumni Ty Templeton and Rick Burkett would team up with now prolific Spider-Man author Dan Slott to fill in the gaps through the pages of the 2003 Batman Adventures title. This book was a game changer. Now that the animated world had grown in scale to galactic threats, the board was clear for Ty and Dan to do pretty much anything they wanted with the characters back in Gotham. In the first issue alone, Batman was an outlaw, the Penguin was mayor, Poison Ivy had become a plant creature, Scarecrow was so disfigured he was only ever seen in shadow, and Arkham Asylum literally exploded. It was clear from the get-go that the writers had a ton of ideas, but for every one they eventually drew to a conclusion, there were another handful of threads left dangling. It's weird to think about today due to how saturated superhero media has become, but in the mid-2000s, the conventional wisdom was that too many different versions of a character at a time would be confusing for audiences, and out of this line of thinking, the Bat embargo was born. For those unfamiliar with the term Bat embargo, Dan Slott summarized what it meant for Batman Adventures like this.
A new Batman cartoon is coming out in the fall. It will have no ties to the Dini Tim continuity. A new comic will be developed to reflect that continuity. It was decided that 2 different Batman books would cause brand confusion. So whoosh, the Batman Adventures book is going away.
On January 30th, 2004, just days after the 10th issue of the series hit stands, the team was informed that their run on Batman Adventures would end with the 17th issue. As a result, the 40-plus issue storyline they had been setting up had to be left by the wayside and wrapped to the best of their ability quickly. By this point, DC Solicitations had already announced issues number 11 through 14, leaving only 3 issues for the team to go out on a bang. As Dan put it,
"It took me a good week to work through the obvious anger and frustration. In the end, it took my co-writer Ty to turn me around. He got me to look at the situation in a completely different light. We still had enough advance notice that we could scrap our current storyline and send the series in style." That's pretty cool when you think about it. We get to be the guys who are gonna wrap up the present and tie the bow. The entire breadth of the Batman Adventures legacy, 3 to 4 cartoon series, 4 to 5 comic series, and various minis and one-shots, and we get to be the ones to say goodbye. That's a pretty big honor. and an even larger responsibility.
Truth be told, the team stuck the landing. Issue number 15 saw the return of guest writer Jason Hall to bring Mr. Freeze's story arc to a beautiful close. Number 16 broke the relationship between Harley and Ivy when Pamela crashed her wedding with the Joker and left us with a story that's had fans questioning to this day whether or not the Poison Ivy from the new Batman Adventures is truly her or a clone. And issue number 17, which Dan wrote long before the cancellation notice as the intended end to the series, brought Bruce Wayne face to face with the man who murdered his parents all those years ago. While the cancellation meant we never found out why Scarecrow looked the way he did, or who that woman was in Jim Gordon's bed, or maybe even more importantly, who was under the Red Hood, it did open the door to some of the best Batman Adventures issues since the series started a decade beforehand. When I say these mysteries were never solved, I mean we never got to see the payoff play out in print. Thankfully, in the time since Batman Adventures number 17's release, both writers have been pretty open with their plans and where the story was headed. So now that you know the history of what did happen, let's talk about what could have been. And what better place to start than things that almost made it into the 17 issues that we got that just didn't quite make it for one reason or another. As mentioned before, the first issue of the series saw the destruction of Arkham Asylum, a plotline that would follow through to issue 4, in which Batman finally tracks down the Demon's Head, who reveals that his plan was to murder the rest of the Rogues Gallery as a gift, stating, "Where my daughter sees greatness, I see a great many distractions, so I chose to remove them for you as a gesture of goodwill between us." The story ends with the side of good prevailing as Ra's is finally taken to prison. While not an effect of the cancellation, this is where we come across our first cut issue. According to Ty,
I wrote a script for Batman Adventures number 5 that focused on Ra's in prison. The whole script, dialogue, and everything was rejected outright. I was told that we had finished with Ra's in number 4 and it was time to move on to other characters. Well, the editor is the boss, so I wrote a different script for number 5, which covered Bullock getting fired, and that turned out pretty good as well.
while the series cancellation ultimately axed tons of stories, the removal of this potential 5th issue spelled trouble for a storyline that Ty had set up 4 years prior in Gotham Adventures number 9. That story took Batman and Batgirl to Tibet to face Sensei, the leader of the League of Assassins. Facing an easy defeat, Sensei is about to deliver the killing blow to Batman, but Ra's steps in and orders Sensei's surrender. According to Ty, this was because Batman was needed alive for something Ra's was planning in Brazil.
There was 2 follow-up issues planned detailing the events in Brazil, but they were never published because I stopped working on the series for a while. These stories may yet see the light of day now that I'm back working on Batman Adventures, but Ra's is currently in jail, so his plans are suffering a few setbacks, no doubt.
Unfortunately, without Ra's back on his feet, we're left to wonder what these plans could have been. Luckily, the issue we got as a replacement was still great. It was a thrill to spend time with Detective Bullock after he was fired from GCPD, and Deadshot returning following his animated debut was a lot of fun. While editorial decisions can axe entire stories, more often than not, they only remove small pieces of script. Sometimes these take the form of quips like a reference Deadshot was going to make about porn publisher Larry Flint in issue number 5, or removing full scenes altogether, like Batman recounting a match of speed chess against Two-Face in the park for issue number 9. Other times, gigantic overhauls can be made to a story without editor input at all. For example, issue number 12 saw the return of Nightwing. Where is he, I hear you asking? Well, after finally branching out on his own, Dick Grayson is found living in Bloodhaven, working a case where the Riddler had been attacked and left in a coma. Unbeknownst to him, however, Edward Nygma has been attempting to go straight and was working with Batman at the time. The adopted father and son duo reunite briefly to solve the case, but how it played out on the page isn't how it was originally intended.
My original plan? Something I thought was drop dead brilliant. Batman had the Justice League. Nightwing would have his own team. Now everyone would think it was the Titans. This was before the Teen Titans cartoon was announced. So we'd pull a switch and make it Nightwing and the Outsiders. Metamorpho was already announced to appear in the Justice League cartoon, which was in our Bat Adventures universe. So I thought that would be cool. I mean, who'd ever see that coming? Nightwing and the Outsiders. Genius! Well, it was so brilliant that DC was already planning it for the DCU. Time for a new idea. Batman has to track a killer to Nightwing's new city. His name? Deathstroke. Once in Bloodhaven, Nightwing takes the lead. He's had more experience dealing with Deathstroke, and this is his city. Can Batman play second to Nightwing? Okay, that's pretty cool. Bam! Teen Titans is announced. Deathstroke is going to be a big character in their new cartoon. And we're not sure if it's set in the Batman Justice League Batman Beyond universe. Time to scrap that idea too.
While there were likely tons of other things nixed and changed during the writing process of the 17 issues of Batman Adventures that did see release, the final few changes I found come from the stretch of issues impacted by the book's cancellation. One change, according to Ty, was that there were discussions for farewell stories for all the characters by killing them off or permanently messing with their status quo. While some of those stories did make their way in, it was specifically mentioned that there would be a version of the Joker and Harley issue where they actually got married. However, the biggest change in the final 3 issues came from issue number 15, the one that focused on Mr. Freeze, as summarized by guest writer Jason Hall.
I wrote the plot for this story as a 2-parter, both full issues, but because of the single issue, 17-page main story, 5-page backstory editorial mandate, there's quite a bit of intricate stuff I had to cut, as well as a number of Freeze-related characters that were originally going to make an appearance. It would have tied into all of Freeze's animated appearances for the most part. A parallel subplot dealing with the relationship between 2 members of the Bat family was dropped too.
The phrase relationship between 2 members of the Bat family is likely causing some of you to reflexively groan, and while I've personally never had an issue with the concept of Bruce and Barbara dating, I can agree that the times we've seen it before weren't necessarily executed particularly well. In Jason's case though, this was a thread that he started to build up in his prior Mr. Freeze issue, Gotham Adventures issues number 51, almost 2 years prior. When asked about it, he responded,
"Concerning Bruce and Barbara, on Batman Beyond it was basically said that Barbara and Bruce had a romantic relationship in the past, and strongly implied that this relationship had something to do with Nightwing leaving Gotham, and that this relationship was the one that meant the most to Bruce. At least in my mind. Just look at that scene in Out of the Past, when Bruce is looking at the photo of himself and Barbara together. And all that had to start somewhere. So I wanted to hint at that."
Personally, with how perfectly he executed the story around Victor and Nora, I'm convinced that Jason would have been the right guy to handle the dynamic between Bruce and Barbara. But alas, the planned two-parter turned into a one and done, and all we have of what could have been is the story's original outline, which on its own is 3 pages long. We'll be sure to link the full thing below, but otherwise, you'll be getting the summary of what was cut from that story right after this. Hey everybody, my desk is kind of a mess. We're gonna ignore that. As I'm recording this, it is New Year's Eve, so you're getting this video in the new year. There's a lot of pressure around the New Year's to kind of map out the rest of your year, to make sure that you are the best version of yourself throughout the year. Some of you may have pretty lofty New Year's resolutions. Maybe some of you have already broken them a day or two into the new year. I just wanted to you know, just come here and let you know that that's okay. 2019, I had a New Year's resolution to work out more. Oh, hold on, let me let the boy out of here. Towards the end of 2019, some of y'all were commenting on videos being like, "Hey, you've been gaining weight, are you doing okay? Blah, blah, blah." And to be honest, I wasn't doing okay. It really got in my head. I was just like, you know what, they're right. I need to do something about this. So early in the year, I would, you know, going, hitting the treadmill every day and stuff like that. And then the pandemic happens. The gym is closed. For a while, I just kind of gave up on it. I gave up. Didn't really try to look for an alternative way to work out. I just figured, well, this is where I am. And you know what? That's okay. A lot of the times, we don't give ourselves room to give up, and we really kick ourselves when we're down. You should be kind to yourself this year. It's okay to realize that a goal that you set is maybe a bit bigger than you were able to achieve. It's okay to give yourself space and come back to it later. By summertime, maybe July, August, I started just pulling up workout tapes on YouTube. Decided, you know, let's get back into this. Let's try to get healthy again. I weighed myself today, and I'm about 40 pounds lighter than when I started the year, just because I was able to kind of give myself space when I needed to. 2020's been a terrible year for all of us. 2021 could be better, but if it's not, don't put that failure on yourself and learn to love yourself a little bit. Even when you feel like you're giving up on something that might have been important, you're not giving up, you're just putting it to the side for a little while. I just want y'all to know I love y'all, and y'all should love y'all too. But with that said, there are some patron names that we need to go over. First up, and the only new one, is Turbo Stew, who joined at the $15 tier, so they're getting in all of our monthly patron hangouts. They're getting in on the exclusive behind the scenes Instagram. They get coupon codes for our merch store. There's a bunch of cool stuff. You can join them, get your name set in videos by going to patreon.com/DCAU Watchtower. After them though, we have a whole list of people. I don't know how much money you all throw collectively at us. As always, we've got to thank Aaron Young, Cameo Shadowness, Mac, Robert Sterling, Luke Mears, Spider Scourge Streams, and the late, the great Richard Mon 12. He's not dead. Y'all's support is so appreciated, especially over this last year. I'm so glad that you guys have been here with us. Now I gotta go record the outro to this video. While the majority of the story did make its way to print, Jason's original outline does offer a few interesting bits that didn't make their way in. For instance, while issue number 15 starts with a fight between Nora and her then husband Francis D'Anjou, the original intention was to begin with a who's who of animated Frieza appearances. The story begins with a TV news report. GothCorp's patents were sold out from under Wayne Enterprises to the newly founded Powers Technology. Due to a hidden clause in GothCorp's initial takeover, former GothCorp CEO Ferris Boyle, recently released from prison, earned a reported $7 million on the deal, which was spearheaded by Dr. Francis D'Anjou, head of the Immortality Project. Not only was that project's research included in the deal, circle, but also that of the infamous Victor Freeze, also known as Mr. Freeze, which, ironically enough, includes Freeze himself, as the accident that transformed him was a result of an experiment originally owned by GothCorp. Victor Freeze's whereabouts are currently unknown. Ferris Boyle from Heart of Ice is watching the news report and entertaining a lady friend in his penthouse. That is, until a small mechanical spider-like robot sneaks in and freezes him to death with freeze-type technology. Cut to Blackgate Prison, where Grant Walker, last seen in Batman Gotham Adventures number 5, is being kept in the hospital wing, his body being slowly destroyed from his systemically damaged DNA, the same thing that ultimately made Mr. Freeze a head in a jar. Another mechanical spider infiltrates the facility, freezing Walker solid, then shattering him to pieces. As for the aforementioned Bat family romance, Jason's outline more or less deals with Barbara closing the door on the Dick Grayson chapter of her life, rather than outright jumping into Bruce and Barbara being established as an item at this point. At the Batcave, Dick is asking Barbara out on a date, and she's attempting to make up an excuse to turn him down when the call comes in from Batman about the murders. Batgirl and Nightwing meet up with Batman and Gordon on the roof of police headquarters to discuss the situation. Other nods to this dynamic are added to scenes that were present in the comic, such as Nightwing trying to tag along to the Arctic Circle and being visibly jealous when he's left behind. Circling back to the inclusion of Powers technology, this version of the comic would have revealed that Warren Powers, father of Batman Beyond villain Derek Powers, would have been in league with D'Anjou. At the offices of Powers Technology, CEO Warren Powers receives a phone call informing him that Nora is on her way to find Freeze in the Arctic Circle, and the call is from Francis D'Anjou. Once at the Arctic Circle, much of the action would have played out the same as we see in the final issue, but with one exception. A Powers Tech helicopter would have beaten Batman to the scene, and thus, much of Batman's role in the print comic would have been split up with the helicopter and its crew. For example, rather than Nora and Freeze running from the Batwing and tripping along the way, they would have been running from the helicopter, which would have shot Nora, causing her to drop Freeze's head, as seen in the comic. Rather than Nightwing explaining D'Anjou's plan back at the Batcave, this would have happened over comms while Batman was still in the Arctic Circle. However, Batman wouldn't have had time to relay the message before the Powers helicopter fires a missile at Freeze, which ultimately causes his head to go missing. Upon returning to the Batcave, the conversation would have been a bit different, and instead focused more on the romance subplot. Later, in the Batcave, Barbara confronts Dick, continuing their dating conversation from earlier, telling him that he had his chance with her a while back, but he decided not to take advantage of it, and now it's too late. She just didn't want him to go on thinking that there was still a possibility of anything more than friendship between them. Besides, who has time for a relationship with the nights already spent fighting crime? Barbara then goes off to practice sparring with Bruce as Dick watches. Alfred asks if anything is the matter, and Dick replies that it's nothing. He just feels a bit cold. And finally, rather than the story ending with Freeze's head sinking in the Arctic, we cut to Powers Technology, where the helicopter pilot is reporting to Warren Powers that they have successfully retrieved their property from the site of the avalanche. Powers is pleased, saying that it might come in handy someday. The secrets of immortality are locked inside that head. Then we see Freeze's head being placed in cold storage. Just before the door closes shut, we see Freeze say, "Nora." Then the door closes. I've got to be honest, I hadn't read any of that before popping it into the script, and as cringe as it may be, I think I've got to give myself a pat on the back for my assumption that Jason would handle the Batgirl-Batman relationship better than others who have tried in years since. While the relationship isn't spelled out entirely in this extended version of the comic, the setup here tackles one of the largest problems I've seen many of you mention that you had with the story in Batman Beyond 2.0. Nightwing gets closure, but not only that, Barbara is shown to have agency and be her own character independent of who she may have slept with in the past. More or less, my hunch was based off of the fact that while Paul Dini treats Nora more like a sexy lamp, as seen by his recent cheap kill of her in Batman The Adventures Continue, Jason goes out of his way to make her feel like an actual character. Or, in his words,
"It was important to me to establish her as way more than just a pretty-faced damsel in distress, which is also why I established her as an excellent scientist in her own right in Batman Gotham Adventures 51.
But of course, you're not here for my thoughts on comic book relationships. You're here for the cut content. And now that we're up to the end of the series print run, there's a lot more of that coming. And that whole thing with Powers Industries, oh man, is it going to become important down the line. Following the news of cancellation, in March of 2004, Dan Slott revealed his plans for upwards of 6 arcs of Batman adventures. These were the Matches Malone arc, in which he set up Eel O'Brien, Phantasm, and the Red Hood, an undefined second arc that began with the return of Nightwing and introduced the Red Hood suspects, a third arc involving a nifty Arkham thing, a fifth arc with the origin of Plastic Man, Joker vs. Red Hood, and the Red Hood's identity revealed, and finally, a sixth arc focused on a World's Finest story. Now, I'm sure you're wondering about the fourth arc, and so am I. It's unclear whether that was a numbering mistake or not, but in the same interview with Silver Bullet Comics that I mentioned before, a Brave and the Bold arc was mentioned. So perhaps that would have been the missing fourth arc, or it could have happened after the World's Finest story. Who's to say? While I'm certain that the majority of you who care enough about this comic series all these years later are just champing at the bit to get to the Red Hood reveal, and trust me, it is a doozy. Like, bigger than some of you who think you know may even realize, we've gotta do this in order. So now that we're out of the first arc with the issues that went to print, let's hop into arc 2. With Dan having mentioned before having Nightwing off panel for a year at the start of arc 2, and the inclusion of Warren Powers in the original script for issue number 15, matching something a Twitter post in which Dan revealed he was going to be a Red Hood red herring, it seems as though the second arc was planned to begin at issue 12. While it's unclear how it would have played out, according to Ty, this second year would have seen the return of Talia al Ghul, as well as Harvey Bullock, who was now a private eye working for Bruce Wayne, and never knowing he was working for Batman. There were other small things hinted at that would have occurred during this arc, such as the next set of 4 backups featuring stories of teen Bruce Wayne, or revealing whether or not Catwoman had actually peeked under Batman's cowl back in issue number 10. But perhaps the biggest part of this story that we have is the follow-up to the Riddler's coma that we see in issue number 12.
See, Slott and I were planning another Riddler issue in our next arc, now lost in limbo, where Eddie wakes up with no idea who he is, which becomes the ultimate riddle. Who am I? It would have been fun. We still might do that story if they ever let Slott and I near the other Bat books.
Not much info is known about Arc 3, but if you've been following us for a while, it may sound familiar as we've brought it up a time or two in previous videos.
We'd always planned to do an issue where Joker and Tim face each other down in the ruins of Arkham, and Tim escapes unhurt, and Joker doesn't die. Just to hammer the idea home that Batman Beyond isn't the only future for these characters. Otherwise, Tim wouldn't have been in the series much longer.
And this brings us up to Arc 4, or 5, since Dan skipped Arc 4 in that list. Thing is, I've got a lot more info that I wasn't able to deduce what arc it was supposed to go in. So let's just pretend all of that stuff is Arc 4 and we'll put it here. Over the years, stories focusing on specific rogues have been teased, including a creepy Man-Bat story, some Two-Face ideas that were way cool, as well as stories featuring Scarecrow, Killer Croc, and Bronze Tiger. Of the ones mentioned, we did get more info on Scarecrow's story.
The Scarecrow's new look came from a couple of sources. 1, a tragic mistake made when mixing fear potions, a mistake he blames on Batgirl, left a chemical burn on most of his face, which he now makes every attempt to hide. And 2, in the intervening years and an adventure we didn't see, in a different state than the one with Gotham City in it, Scarecrow was found guilty of multiple murders and sentenced to death by hanging. As he fell through the trapdoor, it wasn't Crane's neck that snapped, but the rope itself. The Professor of Fear survived the experience, but what little was left of his mind went completely over the edge, and he now believes himself to be a ghost, though he is clearly not.
There were a few other flashback stories planned as well to fill out the missing year between Gotham Adventures and this series, such as showing the Penguin's election actually playing out and explaining the injury that resulted in Alfred's use of a cane. Furthermore, there were plans to reveal this woman in Jim Gordon's bed to be none other than Sarah Essen, Jim's partner from Batman Year One, who eventually becomes a love interest and at one point deduces that Batman is Bruce Wayne. Whether or not that second part would have played out in this series is anyone's guess, but it may not be a coincidence that she was introduced in the story where Catwoman may have peeked under the mask. Ending off this section, there are two full scripts for unused stories by Vito Del Sante, another guest author on the series, available on the World's Finest website. One, titled Field Trip, is a 5-page story that sees an overzealous third grader break off from his group touring GCPD to find the bat signal. The other, titled The Next Best Thing, is a 17-pager that sees Nightwing return to the Batcave, hoping to team up with Batman to return Two-Face to Arkham, but instead is met by none other than Talia. I would read both of these in full, but by this point, the anticipation for unmasking the Red Hood is killing me. So in lieu of that, we'll link those below with the full outline from the Mr. Freeze story from earlier. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for.
Batman will return after these messages on Kids WB. Now back to the new Batman Superman adventures on Kids WB.
To set up the 5th arc, Dan and Ty centered issues number 5 through 8 around the return of Andrea Beaumont, otherwise known as the Phantasm. Prior to her appearance in issue number 5, it had been 7 years since the Phantasm appeared in Batman and Robin Adventures Annual number 1, a much larger wait time than the weeks between her Watchtower Database appearances. Despite her debut film having been a box office flop, there had been enough time for it to garner a cult following and generally come to be considered the best Batman film of all time. So Dan and Ty had a lot to live up to. The story sees Andrea return to Gotham, now a member of Black Mask's False Face Society, a group recently infiltrated by none other than Bruce Wayne's alter ego, Matches Malone, and a pre-Plastic Man, Eel O'Brien. As we move from issue to issue, Batman ultimately takes the group apart from within, and we come to understand that Black Mask wasn't the one pulling the shots. The true man behind the curtain reveals themselves in the final panels of issue number 8's main story. As for Gotham City, I'll make my presence known there again. Yes, and when that time comes, I believe I'll handle the matter myself. I wonder if they'll even remember the Red Hood. If you'll recall, I mentioned earlier that Dan Slott got the news of the series cancellation on January 30th, 2004. 2 months earlier, things seemed to be moving along as planned, and following the release of issue number 8, Dan was seen around the Toon Zone message boards replying to fan feedback, teasing where the story would go by saying things like,
all I can say is that when readers finally do get to see what Phantasm is up to, and just who the Red Hood really is, all will make sense. All will feel fair. All will jibe with the animated universe's continuity. And nothing will be what you expect.
And
Phantasm hasn't been acting out of character. Trust me, she's got an agenda, she's just keeping it secret. When we find out what she's really up to, everything will make sense. From Batman Mask of the Phantasm, to Paul Dini's story in Batman and Robin Adventures Annual number 1, to where we're going, everything will tie up into a nice little package and make every Bat fan happy. Really.
Dan would go on to joke about the identity of the Red Hood a handful of times. This man literally made a Red Hood is hush joke nearly 17 years before we ever did. And literally 2 days before receiving the cancellation news, suggested that the Red Hood and the woman in Commissioner Gordon's bed were one and the same. But much like Icarus flying too close to the sun, Dan was about to learn that sometimes plans don't work out as they're intended. Following Following the series cancellation, behind the scenes, Dan was plotting a way to finish the story through the Justice League animated titles. Having written 5 stories for Justice League Adventures simultaneously to his Batman work, in retrospect, this would have seemed like a surefire way to work around Batman Adventures' early demise. However, as anyone with access to Google can tell you, Dan's last contribution to that title came in November 2002. From what I can tell, he never publicly discussed this plan, and it was only ever brought up by Ty Templeton in July of 2005, as if it may still be a possibility. Unfortunately, that was a matter of months after Dan Slott signed an exclusive contract with Marvel. So, despite the Justice League Unlimited tie-in running through 2008, this possibility was, in fact, impossible. Over the years following, both Dan and Ty kept a bit of a tight lip on the reveal. Ty, more often than not, stating that it was Dan's story to tell, and Dan, well...
It still hurts. So no, not gonna tell. Maybe someday, just not today. The wound's still too fresh.
It wouldn't be until 2013 that fans finally got closure on this mystery, when friend of the channel, Jim Harvey of World's Finest Online, met Dan at Fan Expo and got answers.
Had Batman Adventures continued, the Red Hood would have been revealed as Andrea Beaumont's mother, Victoria Beaumont, who also happened to be the real head of the Valestra mob. Years ago, she faked her death in an attempt to get the family away from the Valestra mob, and was disappointed to see her family eventually fall into their clutches. However, when she saw what happened to her husband, and what eventually became of her daughter, she felt that it was time to not only get revenge on the Valestra mob, but take Gotham for herself. Inevitably, this would have led to a lot of devastating confrontation between her, Batman, and Andrea Beaumont.
Given that this information is now 7 years old, it's possible that some of you may have already been aware of the shocking twist. But recently, we learned that this was only one layer of the reveal. Back in August, when we were deeply focused on the latest addition to the DCAU, Batman The Adventures Continue, there was a lot of DCAU Red Hood discourse going on as a result of Jason Todd now being retconned into this universe. Over on Twitter, one fan posed the question as to whether or not Jason had already been part of this universe via the Red Hood from Batman Adventures. Before we had the chance to answer with the information from World's Finest, another commenter responded saying, "I've asked Dan Slott about this a couple times, never got an answer. Hopefully, one day we'll find out." And then, out of nowhere, like he was a Beetlejuice whose name you only had to say once to get his attention, Dan appeared and dropped an absolutely gigantic bomb on the DCAU lore.
Sorry, I've actually answered over time. The next arc was going to introduce a number of suspects for who it might be, one of them being Derek Powers' father, Derek being Wayne's business partner in Batman Beyond. But he was going to be a red herring. The sleight of hand was going to be that the story would also introduce Powers' current wife, and what her deal/secret was going to be was that she was secretly Victoria Beaumont, Phantasm's mom who faked her death. We were going to play fair with the clues, and dole them out over time, with the biggest being that Andrea had stopped visiting her mother's grave, because she'd figured out her mother wasn't dead and no one was really buried there. This is why Phantasm was really back, and why she'd been trying to infiltrate Red Hood's gang, with the first step being infiltrating Black Mask's gang. The payoff to all of this would have been my 3rd or 4th arc of the series, and by that time Eel would have been Plastic Man and helping out too. But sadly, I never got to a second full arc of Batman Adventures. So it was a little silly of me to plan out such a long-form story. I was aiming towards a big 25th issue payoff. That was the goal. Sorry.
Not only was the Red Hood the long thought to be deceased mother of Andrea Beaumont, but she was also Derek Powers' stepmother? Blight and Phantasm were related by marriage? It would be accurate to say that the one present-day Batman story that has the biggest emotional impact on who Bruce becomes during Batman Beyond would be Tim Drake's fall to the Joker, as seen in the flashback sequence of Return of the Joker. But had this story played out as intended, it could have had huge ramifications for how we perceive his character in Batman Beyond. The family he lost his company to now being synonymous with the family of the woman who almost got him to give up the life of a vigilante. So much potential for brilliant storytelling just thrown away because a company didn't think readers would be able to differentiate between versions of an animated Batman. And now we're just left with the knowledge of what could have been and the question, what if? All right. Oh no. I know this was a long one, and I wanted to thank you all for sticking around through it. This volume of Batman Adventures is probably one of my favorite comic runs of all time. And while it could 100% be because I consume more on-screen superhero media than the printed source material, I like to think that it's because Dan, Ty, Jason, Vito, and everyone involved had a deep understanding of not just the characters they were writing, but the craft of storytelling. If you haven't read the series yet, I definitely recommend it. There's a lot of high stakes action, shaking up the foundations of the DCAU status quo, and despite all the questions raised by the series cancellation, the amount of payoff that we do get throughout the series never makes the story feel as if it's incomplete. Well, maybe except for that Red Hood thing. Big thanks to Keanu Comics and Benjamin David of Above and Batman Beyond for doing some of the voices on this one. Both of those guys have pretty small YouTube channels in comparison to us, and could definitely benefit from y'all clicking the links down in the description and giving them a subscribe, giving them some views. Last I looked, Keanu hasn't even hit 100 subscribers, so seriously, go check them out. Of course, a huge shout out also to V and Fuso for hopping on this one as well. James recently got to go over to his channel to talk about the art switch from Batman the Animated Series to the new Batman Adventures, and that video was a ton of fun. So if you missed it, be sure to give it a watch and sub to V as well. Once again, I want to thank our patrons for supporting us throughout the year. With everything that's been going on in 2020, I understand all too well how tight money can be in these times. So the fact that you still see supporting us as worthwhile has been an incredible blessing. Just mwah, I love y'all so much. All three of us on the channel lost our jobs back when the pandemic started, so more or less doing this is our jobs now. And while it's not as financially lucrative as my pre-pandemic job working on a food truck, it's been much more personally and creatively fulfilling getting to solely focus on these deep dives into the things that we love. If you'd like to help us turn this whole shebang into a more financially sound career path, you can do so for as little as $1 a month over at patreon.com/DCAU Watchtower. If you can't do it, don't worry about it. But if you can, we would so much appreciate it. Of course, there are other ways that you can help support us for free by sharing this video with your friends on social media, hitting the like button, dropping a comment, and making sure you're subscribed with the bell notifications on. In fact, if it's not too late, you could also call your congressperson and tell them to pass another stimulus check. With all that being said, I've been Maddie Washburn, and you've been watching the Watchtower Database. We'll continue to stay those things so long as you continue to stay you. I love your faces, and I wrote that I'll see you next year, but guess what? This got put on hold because James got COVID, so it is next year, and I'm seeing ya with my eyeballs.